Welcome to Divorce on Planet Earth, Kate Scharff's real-world advice for well-intentioned humans. I'm your co-host, Jane Prelinger. Welcome to our pilot episode. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Jane.
So, Kate, this is the episode where we introduce ourselves and describe what the show's all about.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'll start. I am, I think actually I'll start with us. I think that's much more interesting. You and I have known each other how long has it been? I mean, at least 20 years.
Yeah.
Probably, since we were fledgling psychotherapists
That's right.
in training together. Yeah. And I'll out you here. I remember it was shortly after, a couple of years after your divorce.
Yes, indeed.
And shortly after we met, I got divorced. And I remember calling you and saying, please meet me at Starbucks.
That's
Sorry
right,
to buzz market
Kate.
that change. And meet me at Starbucks and tell me that I'm going to be okay, right? What's it like to be divorced? I remember that really clearly. But we're both therapists, and we've been working for a long time in the field. So we're both friends and colleagues. And in the last sort of 15 of my 30 years in practice, I've developed an expertise in separation and divorce. And you have your own version of that.
I do, Kate. I've been in the field for about 20 years, and I've worked with couples and individuals. But unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, I have seen a fair amount of divorce in the last 20 years in my practice.
Yeah. Well, it's impossible to have a life. I was going to say a psychotherapy practice, but it's also impossible to have a life and not to be
absolutely
dealing with separation and divorce, either in your own family or among your friend group or, just in the culture.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very happy to be doing this show with you. I've always thought of you as the sister I never had.
Okay.
Even though I have three sisters. Yeah. I have three sisters and a brother. So
right back at you.
Yeah, right. You're still the one I never had.
Yes.
Okay, well, why don't we talk a little bit about what people can expect from this show? I think that the title, Real World Advice for Well-Intentioned Humans, sort of says it, or at least it was our attempt to kind of capture the spirit or of the concept of the show. It is an advice show for people who are thinking about have gone through a separation or divorce and are looking for advice. But we think that it's different in some ways. There's a lot of divorce advice out there, and some of it is very good, actually, very solid. But much of it assumes a few things, right? It assumes that the person reading or listening to the advice is in a position to take it, right? That is or at least to implement it most of the time. And, in the emotional maelstrom of divorce, honestly, most of us have a hard time even thinking, or some days sort of putting one foot in front of the other. So it's good to have the advice, but it is not realistic to think that we can implement it well all the time. And then the question is, how do you recover and kind of get back on track? I think there's that. The other thing is that there is some advice that assumes you're divorcing a crazy person, and some people are, and there's advice around that. And then there's advice that assumes you're dealing with a rational person, and some people are, but really on most days, anyone who is getting separated or divorced is dealing with someone who is also going through their own roller coaster of emotions.
Yes, right.
And so it's not reasonable to think that you're dealing with a reasonable person on any given day. And we'll address all of the angles of this, right, over time. If you're getting separated from somebody who's very difficult all the time, that's a kind of topic. If you're getting divorced from someone who's reasonable sometimes or reasonable on some issues, which is most of us, we'll get to that as well.
Yeah. To be clear, we are talking about more than just literally divorce, a legal marriage, right? Yes. We're talking about the dissolution. How would you describe it?
I'm glad you raised that.
Yeah.
The way I think you and I think about intimate relationships is, that a relationship is any two people. Well, actually, there are other ways of defining relationships, but I think, polyamory is not an area of expertise for me. So for this show, or for you, you're sort of nodding. No judgments, just not something we know a lot about.
Right.
So for our purposes, it's any two people who share life, love, and intimacy, maybe children. And actually, I would add here that a parent is anyone who identifies as a parent and who a child identifies as being in a parental role, right? Who has responsibility for the well-being and the welfare.
Okay, that's helpful.
Of a
That's
child.
clear. Yes.
Although we are certainly speaking to people who don't have children, people whose children are grown, and maybe people who have been in a long relationship but were never legally married.
Okay, yes.
Or who share a child with someone with whom they were really never in a relationship with, but have to deal with co-parenting issues.
Absolutely. Okay, that's helpful. Yes.
Yeah. Also, a parent is any gender or sexual orientation and may or may not call themselves mom or dad. So I think one of the things that you and I really feel is that even though divorce is statistically normal in this country and actually in most of the Western world, it's still hovering around 50%. It's actually going up in the over 50s.
Is it?
Yeah,
that I didn't know.
Yeah, the gray divorce is the sort of the big story right now. It's the only group that in the population where the statistics of divorce are rising. But this is true all over the world, in every developed country. And I think because of that, because it's become so sort of common, we forget how hard it is. It's not that we don't stigmatize it. I think we do as a culture. The fact that it's so common doesn't mean that we don't still look at divorce as a failure. I mean, look at the words we use. We talk about broken homes.
Yes.
We talk about the nuclear family. And I think there's still a feeling that we carry around, sometimes unconsciously, that the original nuclear family, 2 parents, maybe a kid or 2, is the best version of the family.
Right, the standard, yes.
Yeah, the gold standard.
Yes.
And that any reconstituted family is a pale shadow. And it's true. We know that divorce especially is especially hard on kids. But, although the research was very doom and gloom early on, all these studies in the 70s that showed that if a kid had to go back and forth between 2 homes, they were kind of doomed.
Yes.
And they couldn't form loving relationships in the future, and they were going to become, juvenile delinquents and end up living on the street with a needle in their arm. It was really bad.
Yeah.
It was really horrifying. There's a lot of new research that shows that's not actually true, that there are factors that determine how well kids are going to adapt to a parent's divorce. And then the biggest one has to do with whether or not parents can shield kids from conflict.
Yes.
Not so easy, but something we'll talk about a lot.
Yeah, Kate, I think we're going to actually devote some time to that later. Not in this podcast, but in a future one.
Yeah,
right.
Pretty soon, I think.
Yes.
And then the second big factor is, to what extent can parents support kids in having a full, rich relationship with each other, when possible. So the good news here is that adults and children can move through a separation divorce process, even though it's really, really hard. In fact, I think it's harder than people imagine it to be, but still come out the other side whole and happy and ready to get on with the rest of their lives. And, part of what you and I want to talk about is how to help oneself and one's family and one's children to do that.
Yes, which is a slightly different take from the absolute catastrophic, bleak news that we hear all the time.
It is, but it's also a different take from, hey, this is your opportunity to emerge from this chrysalis, a beautiful butterfly.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
You just need to take a lot of warm baths, self-care.
Yes.
It's really, really hard. And, I think unless you have been in the position of, facing, standing on the edge of that precipice, whether you're the initiator or not, of the split, standing on the edge of that precipice, facing the loss of the things that you hold most dear, right? Like your partner of however many years, your financial stability, time with your children, then it's really hard to understand what it's like. And it's very easy to be judgmental. It's very easy to judge a person who behaves irrationally or seemingly irrationally. I have in my work, I do a lot of divorce mediation and other stuff around, different processes for helping people get divorced. And, it's not uncommon for someone to get stuck on a position like, I must have the children,
Yes.
This number of days per month, or they can only spend overnights with me during the week, or I mean, I don't want to suggest that that's always an irrational position.
Right.
But any irrational position like, I'm going to court because I need the world to know that my spouse had an affair.
Right.
Well, it's easy to be judgmental about that. But if you haven't been on the receiving end of an affair lately, you don't understand the sort of craziness that it induces. And
yes.
I mean, I know you know a little bit about this. I mean, I saved some emails that I wrote. Now it's, my kids are grown. It's about 20 years ago when I divorced, but I saved some emails that make me sound like a crazy, vindictive lunatic. And I keep them around. I was already in the field, Jane.
Yes, so why do you keep them around, Kate?
I keep them around to remind me to be humble, that when it comes to the choice to divorce, the way we behave after divorce, the way we behave vis-a-vis our former or spouses or partners, there's times where we fall down on the job as a parent.
Yeah.
These are human reactions to highly, highly destabilizing and stressful situations in which we are still asked to make a lot of really important decisions in a short period of time.
Right. Yeah. Kate, you are so brave to save those. Oh my gosh, I've double deleted and trashed everything.
I threw away the hard drive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. But a really, really important point, and you're capturing well the incredible intensity of the divorce experience.
Always.
Yeah.
And I think, so there are a few people who are just really relieved and, perhaps have found another partner and are sort of happy. But honestly, there is nobody who goes through a separation divorce without experiencing loss and pain. And so when I meet someone who is, saying it's really fine, it's so much better, it's actually a relief, and I'm in this wonderful relationship, I think to myself, there's no emotional free lunch here, right?
Yes, Kate, yes.
And if you're not dealing with the feelings associated with it that are not purely positive,
right,
then it just means that it's going to hit you later.
That's
There's
exactly
always
right.
loss, even if it's just the loss of a dream of what could have been.
Right, absolutely. And I find a lot of people in my practice have sort of less than regretting the loss of the spouse. It's the loss of the nuclear family a lot. That gives them a lot of pain around the holidays, or a lot of pain in general. They'll say, I can't stand that spouse, but the idea of that intact family is really a powerful
and sometimes
one.
The extended family.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, there are many people who have very, powerfully, positive relationships with their in-laws or their, brothers and sisters-in-law, especially people who, married into big families because they didn't have one themselves.
Oh, yes, Kate. Yeah.
And then there's this sort of question of who am I going to be in my social group, in, as a single person? Who am I going to lose in the divorce? How am I going to tolerate back to school night, in the presence of my ex? And can I obligate him contractually to never bring his girlfriend? There is also something I want to say about divorce, which is that I think there's a risk that people might think that even though we're talking about how hard it is, that somehow we are trying to normalize it and sort of suggest that it's okay, it's a viable option, or that we are cavalier about the idea of breaking up a marriage. I think you and I were both children of divorce, and we know how difficult it is to be a kid going back and forth.
Oh, yes.
But I've done a lot of thinking about it, and I think about what my life might have been like had my very unhappy parents stayed together. I don't think divorce is anything anybody could be in favor of. I think it's to be avoided. I think it's harder even than people think it's going to be. But it's not to be avoided at all costs.
Right. I think that's such an important point. And on the flip side, I appreciate what you're saying about we're not cavalier about this. We're not taking this huge life trauma anything but seriously. However, I want to say the people I've worked with in my practice who are saying, why didn't my parents get divorced? Why didn't my parents get divorced? They hated each other. It was so clear, but it was never spoken about. It's really, really complex.
Yeah, it is complex, and I don't judge people's decision about staying or going. I mean, when you marry someone, you're not just marrying a person, you're marrying a life.
Yes.
And the longer you are together, the more things there are in the basket of your life, including an increasingly long shared history.
Yeah.
But, I also want to recognize that, our audience includes people with all kinds of philosophical attitudes about divorce. There are people for whom divorce is either for religious or moral reasons.
It's not an option.
Not an option.
Yeah.
And, you are welcome here also. There's a lot of room for respectful disagreement.
Yes.
Anytime we talk about a topic, we are also, we can never cover it fully. So, in an upcoming episode, we're going to talk about, the question of how to deal with trash talk. When your ex is trashing you to your kids. We're going to talk about how to redress misinformation. But there are also times where your kid has a legit complaint about you, right? So we may not talk about that in that episode, but it doesn't mean we don't know it's true.
Yes. Yeah. That's really important.
But there are
Kate.
always multiple truths, right?
Yes.
And that the truth, slides around sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I wanted to say is that if you are splitting up a long-term relationship, that really I think what we want to provide are ways of thinking about how to do that mitigate pain and set people up for the best kind of, put them back on a good trajectory, or maybe even a better trajectory than they had before. Maybe in a position to form a different kind of long-term relationship, or to get in touch with some ambition for themselves that they didn't have before, or to be able to parent in the way that they wanted to but couldn't when they were compromising in order to stay married.
Yes.
But I don't think we're trying to pretend that it's going to be smooth sailing, or that it might, the process is long. The arc is long.
Absolutely. And though I'm a little bit biased, I do want to put in a plug for the importance of psychotherapy during that period.
Yep.
Think of the people who think they're liberating themselves and actually end up marrying someone where there are very similar patterns in the relationship. So I think we want to be very careful about that piece, and maybe even address it in a future podcast.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's a great point. I don't really know anyone who is going through a divorce who doesn't need some kind of supportive psychotherapy, because the people in our lives can't provide the kind of, non-judgmental, no agenda, right, support and potentially advice that, a professional can. Okay. Well, we haven't talked about everything, but we've gotten across some of the important points. Any last thoughts that you have?
No, I'm just excited for this, and I'm excited for the listeners to join in with this, and I'm going to tell you how you can contact us. But get ready for a really interesting series of podcasts.
Okay. And how can people find us?
Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Divorce for Humans. That's Divorce, the number 4 Humans. And on YouTube at Divorce on Planet Earth. That way you'll know when we have a new blog post, video, or podcast. Speaking of blogs, you can read Kate's at divorceonplanetearth.com. And if you have a question or idea for a show topic, please write to us at info@divorceonplanetearth.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we promise not to share your personal information, including real name and email address. Divorce on Planet Earth is produced by Eric Pagaro. Our music was composed by Ben Kaunitz. I'm your co-host, Jane Prelinger.
I'm Kate Scharff.
We'll talk to you next time.